Hello everybody, it's Ryan. I'm back with another tutorial. This time a request. How can I make this pattern? This was a request about 3 weeks ago. I didn't have time to get to it, and then for the last week I beat my head against the wall trying to figure it out because there was one thing about it that wasn't working for me. And I will show you what I did and why it didn't work. And then I'll show you how to do it right. So here we go. So here you can see a finished version of the pattern, and if I click on it, actually select it all, you can see that each individual item here is part of the repeating graphic. I can show you how I built that, and we'll do that in just a second, but I'll show you why this didn't work the way that I had planned. What I wanted was something that would have this pattern in our swatches here. Anytime you use the pattern, it would resize to whatever shape you're using. So for example, in here I've got this star shaped, and here I've got this square. And in both cases what I've done is I have just basically pasted the pattern in there after I've repeated it, and then put the star shape as a mask around it, a clipping mask. I did the same with this one here. You'll see as I bring it all the way out. That gets really processor intensive, and it'll ruin your file. It'll make it huge in a hurry. I did that a couple of different ways, and I could never seem to get the pattern to repeat both horizontally and vertically because, so let's say you've created this section of the graphic and you want to repeat it just like this. And that's simply simple enough to do. We'll zoom in and I'll just show you what I have done in the past, and we'll snap that to right there so the intersection is good. And then we will just transform again. It's basically just duplicating that same action that we just did. And I'll do quite a few of these for good reason. And then we'll take a bunch, that whole line, drag it down there so we have some space to work with it. And then we'll zoom in again. And we want this point right there to line up with this point right there. So let's do that, and we'll hold down Alt to drag it over, and when it changes from a black arrow to a white arrow, then we know we've sufficiently, or we snap it to that point, zoom out, do it again and again and again and again and again. And I'm going to do it quite a few times just to illustrate the point here. And select it all, drag it over here onto the artboard so we can see it. Now, here is why we need to do this pattern on a grid, and why doing it this way that I've just done, even though it looks like the example and it looks great, I mean, it looks awesome. You can do it this way, but if you want to have the pattern repeat, you won't be able to do this. And let's start this area right down here. And we will grab a rectangle tool, and we will get it so it intersects on that point right there. And we will drag a shape. And I'm just gonna go just a big shape, and we'll make that the default colors, and then we will get rid of the fill color. So as we take a look at this, switching to outline mode, let's get it spot on so we know it's exactly where it needs to be. So now it's exactly lined up with this gray box here and across the bottom of our pattern, right? Well, we'll zoom out, and the problem with using this to create a pattern is that at no point along the line of this square do we have it repeat. It doesn't repeat here. So we have the bottom right corner of the gradient, the gray gradient. Let's change that to another color so it shows up a little better. Something like a bright green. Okay. Now we can see our bright green line, and we can see our other artwork behind it. So this corner doesn't correspond with any other along the way. As you can see, as we zoom in, it's a little bit off there. It's even farther there. And as we go up that line vertically, we don't ever end up with that pattern repeated. I mean, we'd really have to go quite a bit. This box would need to move quite a bit. And if you want to know how many times it would need to do that, we can measure from here to there, and it's going less than 1 point as it transitions that way. And this is 12.6 points. So it would need to repeat the pattern vertically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It would need to be twice as big. It'd end up somewhere out here. So your square that you could use to create the pattern would have to be that big. And that is just not feasible for a simple repeated pattern swatch. You can do it if your processor on your computer can handle that, but it's seriously going to take its toll. That's why we end up going with this other option that I've come up with by using the grid. The good news is I have worked it out so that I have it so it doesn't matter what shape I make the shape that the fill is going to be using that pattern. It's going to use the pattern, and it functions perfectly. So now that I've shown you that it works, I'm going to show you how I did it. First things first, let me take all of these other failed patterns out of the picture because we don't need them. All we want is the one that actually works. So let me get them out, and then I can use that to compare later. That one also failed. Okay, there we have it. So we will open up our layers, and I'm going to turn off that layer that shows the finished product, and we'll go take a look at the original image. As you can see, it is a carbon fiber with the red and black in here. It has some things that are a little different on some parts of the pattern. You can see this red line that shows up here. It also shows up here, and it doesn't show up on this one or this one or this one, but it repeats again here. It's like it looks to me to be a flaw in the original pattern. So we are going to forget that part, but we'll do the other part where we have the red coming all the way down and then having this here. So what I want you to do is make a new layer over here, and that's the new layer or create new layer button on your layer panel, and then we can just hide that. We're going to go to M for your rectangle tool, hit D for default colors, and you'll see that down here. And then we'll take the fill and we will slash that out with the slash right there. And that's the one right next to shift on the right side of your keyboard. Okay, so now we have just a regular rectangle, and you'll see that mine is snapping to something, and I'll show you what that is. Go into View, Show Grid, and then you also make sure that you have Snap to Grid on, and you can see as I zoom in here, there are these little lines that this rectangle is snapping to so that it fills up each of these tiny boxes, and it will only lie, the anchors and the path will only lie across those points of that grid. And that's what we want. That's one of the crucial things that gets us our repeating pattern. Okay, so we don't want it to be plain blank with no fill. So we'll go to our colors, and let's actually go to our swatches, and we'll just pick a red color in there. Actually, if you grab your eyedropper tool, which is I on your keyboard, and just pick that medium red, and you can see that that's, let's turn off the grid so that we can't see that, and that's Command hyphen or single quote or Control single quote on your PC. And we want to turn this actually into a gradient. So what we'll do is we'll just drag that color that we had, and we'll drag away the black and the red, or excuse me, the white. We want to copy this color. So when you click on it, if you hold down the Option or Alt key and drag away from that, you have to keep the held. You have to keep Alt or Option held until you let go of your mouse, and then we made that color. Now we can click on the black and delete that stop. And so we're going from red to red. It should look like a continuous color, and that's great because that's what we want. However, let's look at the colors here. We've got kind of a light red, almost a pink. I guess, yeah, light red is pink. Anytime you add white to red, it becomes pink. Learning with Ryan, isn't this awesome? Okay, so we'll double click, and we are going to go to hue, saturation, and brightness over here in this little options thing, and we're going to bring the saturation down, and you'll see we start to get some of that pink. Let's bring our brightness up a little bit, and what we're trying to go for is this color right here. Okay, I think that's pretty close. There's another way to do that. You could have picked the colors of the gradient in separate swatches and pulled them in here, and then drag them in as stops on our gradient. But I didn't do that, so you don't have to. We're going to drag our red all the way up to about 50%. You could type in here 50%. This isn't a tutorial on how to use the gradient tool, but it will help. And then, since this side is that same color, there's no variation, we can just click to add another one in here. I don't need two, I just need one, so we'll double click on that one. Again, hue, saturation, brightness, HSB on your options here, and we will drop the brightness down until we get that wine red burgundy color over there. And I think that's about it. Okay, now the trick is we need it to be, instead of going side to side, we need it to go from this bottom corner up to here. So we'll grab our gradient tool, which is G on your keyboard. And what we want to do, remember, we start here and we end here. So we want it to start with this darker color and go to the lighter color. So on this other option, or this other block that we're patterning it from, we're going to go from about here to there, and that might not be enough because the white, the pinkish, the white influence in the pink up here is only in this upper corner. We don't want it down here, so let's go from here to there. That might be a little too much. Let's go right there. Nope. About that. That's closer, and we can always drag it around a little bit. We can change the orientation if we need to. I think that will get us better. I'm going to add a stop of red so that it gets to be a little bit more red throughout there. Kind of a, actually, instead of doing a stop, we'll change that transition into the darker color a little later, or a little earlier. in the location and do the same with the white. I think I like that. Okay, back to our selection tool, and that's V on the keyboard, or click this little guy over there. Now what we have is we need to do this upright in the gray. So let's again go to M for our rectangle tool, and we can turn the grid on. And what we really want to do is just select and make a guess of what that's going to be. However, let me show you one thing that would make it a lot easier. If we zoom out our grid a little bit, turn off that background color, or that background layer that I had there, and slide this box until it fits, and change the size until it fits into 1, 2, 3 of these larger grid rectangles. And you can see them. You can change your colors of your grid by all means. Command K, Control K on your keyboard, and go to the colors, and you can change your grid lines if you want. And I want to use those. And now it's pink. So, you know, you can change it to do whatever you want. Let's turn that background back on, and we can take a look. So if we drop this here and assume that this is a 1, 2, 3, 4 width kind of pattern here, from this to that to that transition, then our rectangle is too wide because it's only taking up 2 of those squares. Does that make sense? I know sometimes I don't explain things well. So what we're going to do is just match that pattern, and we're going to get close enough that it works, but we don't have to get it exactly precise. And so then this one would become a too tall version, and we'll grab the eyedropper and get that gray color in there. And then we can turn off that background, turn off our grid, and go take a look at it a little better. Again, we need, I guess we need the background on. We just don't need the grid. Again, we need a gradient, so let's switch it to gradient, which is the greater than for gradient. And we don't want these colors. We can really just click on them and change them to hue, saturation, and brightness, and knock them all down to take out that saturation, take out the color, and it becomes darker, and it becomes black. And then this one becomes a lighter gray. Okay, the other thing is this gradient, we have to change the angle. So back G to your gradient tool, and we're starting at the bottom. We kind of like that angle, but we don't really like that size. We're going to go to A, which is your direct selection tool, which is right there, and click that and step it down just a little bit so that it kind of matches the shape of this other shape here. However, that is too bright. We want it way darker. Way darker. Not that much. Somewhere in there, 55-ish. Okay. All right. So, grid back on. Turn off that background layer, and now we get to do some tricky maneuvering. So we want this to be over here, and we want it to line up so that, oops, I want to make a copy of it, so I should hold down Alt while I drag it, and we can see that it's not tall enough. The other part, it comes above that line there. So what we need to do is extend this a little bit so we can just scale it that way. Let's turn our grid back on so we can see this is the line. This line right here is the line that this ends on, and we can tell from the pattern that it doesn't quite meet that same line. If you can see that right here, here's the top of the red box, and it goes over behind the gradient, and there's a little bit of red from the one above that we can see showing through. So now that I've changed the size of this one, I need that one to be the exact same, so let's just delete this one and drag this one over and put it in place. So now we have both of them. Okay, so let's take these two, and we'll copy them so that they fit right there. And now this is in front of that, or actually it's behind it and it needs to be in front. Okay, so now we have where this lies and that lies and that. So we've got all three of these pieces. So we need this one again to be tied to that. However, we also need this behind one of these. So this is where we start to build that pattern. So let me take these two out, and I'll grab all three of these. And what I'm going to do is hold down Option or Alt and drag, and I'm just going to snap that. Sorry, my graphics are going a little weird. To right there, and we're going to Control or Command Shift left bracket, and that throws it behind. It sends it to the back. And now we need this and this to repeat over here, but it needs to be on the same line. Let's get our grid back, and now we can start building it without seeing that background. And we can just make copies here. And as long as this bottom is always on the grid, I mean, we can just hit duplicate, which is Command D, and that'll make those duplications. And we could do it again here. And now you start to see it come together where we have the repeating pattern. And let's do it again over here. And that is all fine and dandy except for one thing. We have these little weird background things going on. So what we're going to do is grab a rectangle tool and just fill in a background. And send it to back. And we'll only get oh, we need this back on. We need that color right there. There we go. Okay, so now we can start to see this pattern repeating. And we could spend all day building it and putting in, the rest of the shapes that fill it. But we don't have to, because we can make it a pattern. And so that's what we're going to do now. We're going to make it just like this one. Oh, look, it's a different color. This one's a little darker than what I did before. What do you know? Anyway, so we'll make it, we'll make it just like that pattern. And here is what we're going to do first. We take a look, and you see how this one is hidden behind there? So let's bring that forward, or bring it to the front. And it really doesn't matter what's to the front, as long as it overlaps whatever it's supposed to be behind it. So we're going to take our M for our rectangle tool, and we'll hit that default colors by hitting D. And now what do we want to do is find parts that repeat. So let's say we start halfway, or let's start right here at this corner. And we know that is a perfect square because it's based on the grid and it's snapping to the grid. And we can go to wherever this square starts again right here. So it's at the bottom of a gray column and to the right of the gray and this square. So this right here would be sufficient to be where it repeats again. You see how it starts here at the bottom of the gray. We go through the red, through the overlapping gray to the bottom of the next gray. So we start at that same point over here. So now all we need to do is find another place where this vertical line, or this horizontal line, repeats again up here somewhere. So it's at the bottom of the gray, and so straight vertically from this we need to find the bottom of another gray, and that one is right here. So again, looking for this corner, we can go 2, 3, 4 to see where that repeats. And that, let's knock out the center fill, that gives us our repeating square. And is it a square? It should be a square because it's 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, and 1, 2, 3, 4 parts tall. So yeah, it on the grid lines, if you turned your grid back on, you'd see it's a perfect square. So that's great. All right, so what we don't need right now is anything that doesn't fall within this square. So we can take our background, snap that to our square. We can take this one off because it doesn't fall in the square. That one doesn't fall in the square. We'll leave this one on because it does overlap just a little bit right there. This one doesn't fall in the square. That one doesn't. This one overlaps half. This one does not. This, all of these. Those two can disappear. We don't need those. These ones up top, outside of the square, and those three. So that is our pattern right there. Except if we were to take this pattern and throw it into our swatch to make a pattern, it won't look proper. And I'll tell you exactly why. It won't look proper because it will try and make the pattern based on all of the artwork that we have selected. And we need it all selected except this square because, hold on a second, let's just delete it for now. We need all of this selected, and we need all of the artwork as part of our pattern because it will help us to make our pattern. So if I double click that pattern we just made, you can see now it has that white space around it. Even if I do size tile to art, it's not going to reduce that size at all. So we'll cancel out of that, and I'll show you what we need to do. We will actually just undo until we get our black square back. There's our black square that's in front. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut that. We'll hit Command X or Control X on your PC. Select everything else, and we're going to turn this into a group. So Command G or Control G, and that gives you a group so that if we were to move this around, everything would go together. We just click on one part of it and it selects it all. So now we can Command F or Control F to paste that back in front, and we'll select both the rectangle right there, or the square right there, hold down Shift, click on our pattern, and then we're going to do a clipping mask. A couple ways you can do that. You could right click, hit Make Clipping Mask. You could do Command 7 or Object, Clipping Mask, Make So Command 7, Control 7. And there it is. There is our happy little shape. And so now we can test it. Before we make our pattern, we can test this shape as a pattern. And how you do that is you'll drag it around, but when you drag it around, hold down the Alt button. And if we still have Snap to Grid on, then it'll go pretty close. But if we hold down while we're holding down Alt, if we also hold down Shift, then we can keep it directly in line. And let's snap that to the top above there, and look at that. Look at that perfectly seamless pattern. Oh, it's beautiful. All right, let's see if it does it down to the bottom. So we'll click on that original one, hold down Option, Alt, and Shift, and slide it down, and look, it's a perfect pattern. All right, so now we need to select and see if we can go left and right. We'll go that direction, holding down Shift, and it's a perfect pattern. Look at that. I'm so happy. Look at you guys. We made a perfect pattern. All right, we'll go to the right, or the left, excuse me, and there are no problems with our pattern. Okay, so we found it. We made it. All right. So now that we're confident that it works, let's take that pattern and drag it into our swatches. Click into the white space here so that we don't have that selected. And then we're going to make a new shape. And this new shape is going to be whatever you want. You can make a rectangle. Let's go with a star. That'll make it fun. Because, oops, let's move that bad boy down in here into the artboard so we can see it. And then we'll click on that new pattern that we just made, and it doesn't look right. Okay, so now we're going to tweak the pattern a little bit, and this is going to be just super simple because we used the grid to build our pattern. So double click that guy, the pattern over here in the swatches panel. And then we want to choose Size Tile to Art. And what that does is it'll get rid of all this white space. Or we could add some white space by tapping on these H space and V space things. Boom, 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 boom. We don't want those. So set those back to 0. All right. Well, let's take a look at it. Are there any problems with this tile at all? I don't see any. I don't see any at all. So we'll hit save, or we'll hit done. And now we'll take a look, and we can resize our star until it's not a star. It's a weird polygon, and make it bigger so that we can see the repetitions and see if there are anything wrong with this pattern. Nope. And why is that? Well, it's because the pattern is created using a grid, and we've already tested it on a grid. Remember, right here, we tested it on a grid, so we know that it should work. What happens if it doesn't work that way? And I'll show you on this one. You'll notice that this one is not a grid shape. It's a grid shape, but it's not a perfect square. That's what I mean. This one worked because it's a perfect square, and we can set that perfect square in a grid, and it'll always repeat perfectly. And that's ideal. This one, for whatever reason, I didn't choose a grid shape. I'll double click and show you how I ended up without a grid shape, excuse me, a perfect square. I started here and went up 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 grid boxes, and then went over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what's the problem with that? Well, then I've added some variability, and it's not 4 by 4. So what I had to do was do brick by column rather than grid, because if you do grid, then you're going to have 2 columns of the gray rectangles next to each other, and you're going to have 2 of these boxes, the horizontal blocks, and they're going to be too too wide because of how it repeats. So in that case, if you happen to do the same thing, just switch it, and I did brick by column, and instead of half, because it wants to stagger it at half, we're going to stagger it to our offset, brick offset, to a fourth. And that's just how I did it. If I wanted to, I could go back and edit it so that it's a perfect square, and then it would use the grid and everything would be nice. So we'll cancel that because I don't want to ruin that one. That is how you make a really awesome carbon fiber pattern with overlaps on both horizontal and vertical. So now that you have that, we could delete or move away these other ones, take our marquee or our rectangle tool, make the full shape, and it's going to load a whole lot faster because it has less information to try and process to make this pattern. And that is it. Thanks for watching. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and hit that like button if you enjoyed it or if you learned something new. I sure enjoyed making it. And also be sure to subscribe for more videos. One of my goals this year is to create more content for YouTube and also on my website, ryandoeseverything.com. Go out and check that out. As always, have a good day and go out and learn something new. Thank you.